Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Public Restroom Creeper by Methoxy87. This happened some years ago during my sophomore year at the University of Michigan. It was during finals week, and I was down on campus studying for the multiple exams I had that day. After studying in a local coffee shop, rest in peace Espresso Royale, I decided to hunker down in one of the academic buildings, Mason Hall, to use the computer lab and printers. But first, however, I needed to make a detour to the bathroom. As finals had started and lectures had ended, the campus was in a quiet state. Everywhere was empty except the bustling main study areas. Thinking I could use that to my advantage, I took the elevator to the 4th floor, which was mostly classrooms, to use the restroom that I thought would be the quietest. Blasting music in my earbuds, I walked in, saw that it appeared empty, and hopped into a stall to do my business. Everything was going well as I just scrolled on my phone, and at that point, having put my earbuds away, I noticed commotion 2 stalls to my right of the stall opening. Not odd, right? Just another student who had the same idea as me. After a weirdly long minute or so, I finally saw a figure pass by my stall. He walked towards the exit in this U-shaped room, only to return after what sounded like getting a view of the sink side of the room. Finishing up in my stall, I then watched this man enter the stall diagonal to me, hold the door at a 45-degree angle open, and peer around at me. Now I was just sitting there, trying to process the middle-aged man seemingly trying to peep at me. I tried to ignore him and just wait him out, but he just stayed, staring. He then began shifting around as if he was trying to adjust his view. Annoyed, I ended up saying, "Is there something I can fucking do for you?" hoping that would get him to leave. Nope. He still sat there, peering around the door. I then said, "What the fuck are you doing?" No response, just his glare. At that point, he began shifting around the stall area, entering other random stalls and roaming around the area in between both sets of stalls, the whole time looking at me through the crack of the door. At that point, my anger turned to fear. Fear to open the stall and come face to face with whoever was brazen enough to be doing that. Something about his movements and unrelenting stare made me feel like I was some type of prey to him. Around that time, I began contemplating calling someone, or calling DPSS, the UMich Security Police. Thankfully, though, someone walked into the bathroom, and the creep immediately left the stall he was posted up in, and left the room as I could hear him open and close the door. Hoping that he was gone, I began to put on my bag and then heard the door open, close, then open again as if someone had just walked in to only instantly leave. In the moment and looking back, I'm pretty sure that this was the creep coming back, yet leaving when he saw the other student at the sink. As I heard the sink turn off, I recognized that as my best chance to get the hell out of there. Walking out with the student, I didn't mention the experience to him. I was just focused on getting away from the restroom. My plan was to go down 1 floor to the 3rd and call DPSS. I figured I had to report this guy in case he tried to pull this again, and assumed the police would want to meet me at the scene. Flustered, I headed down there, and thankfully there was no sign of the creep. Coming out of the doors of the north stairwell, I plopped down on a bench, took a little breather, and began dialing the number for DPSS. Yet, before I could hit the call button, I saw the creep walk through the same stairwell I had come from. He was at a speed-walking pace. Right as he saw me, though, he stopped outside the doorway, He then began a far calmer and casual walk down the hall past me. As he did, he stared at me and peered into empty classrooms. As he went down the hall, I saw him round the corner to the other hall on that floor. The layout was a T-shape. Spooked, I sprang up and began jogging down the stairs. As I descended, I called the police and I explained the whole situation to the dispatcher as I moved swiftly down the stairs and down the hall to the main lobby of the building. Being on the first floor made me feel far better as there was a decent crowd, and I ended up sitting below the staircase in the lobby next to a vending machine area. I finished my call and was told to wait for an officer to arrive. I sat there relieved to just be around other people. Thoughts of that creep's intentions were racing through my mind, and like clockwork, I saw him again. I got a good view of him that time as I was a bit calmer. He had a beard and wore work boots, cargo shorts, and a tucked-in t-shirt. Not a normal look for someone his age roaming around a college campus. He didn't immediately spot me thanks to the crowd, and as he walked down the hall from the stairs I had just run down, he stopped at the vending machine area and looked around. I bowed my head and watched through my periphery in an attempt to blend in more. And after about a minute of him scanning the room, he walked away. Shortly after, the cop arrived. He essentially told me that there was no way he'd be able to find the guy, but he'd take a look at the bathroom anyway. Annoyed, I took his card and then just left. I ended up taking a convoluted route to the undergraduate library through the grad library. I was hoping my route would prevent the creep from seeing me. As I got into the undergrad library lobby, I sat down staring at the door, fully expecting the creep to walk in. Thankfully, he made no appearance. I ended up running into a roommate who joked that I almost got raped and then sat down for my remaining few hours to try and failed to focus on studying. So to the random creep who stalked me throughout the entirety of Mason Hall, let's not meet again. Evil Doppleganger, submitted by Helena Sophia. My story starts about 5 years ago at school. I was 13 years old, and let's say I was not a really great girl. I used to change my grades, get into fights with teachers, and cut classes. Sometime in March, a lot of things happened. My family had a lot of issues, and I was just tired of getting into trouble. And I decided to grow up a little. I stopped cutting classes, which was really hard for me. I couldn't concentrate for too long on one subject. But I actually started studying for tests and got higher grades. As for fights with the teachers, that was even more difficult due to my reputation. But slowly, they all saw me changing my ways and even gave me compliments. One day, at a break, I was on my way to the canteen. Suddenly, a teacher that didn't teach me greeted me and asked me something I would never forget. At that time, I was very self-confident with myself. Read, my head was held high, chest made bigger, walked like I was a queen. The teacher said hello and asked how I was. I looked him up and down and I said, "Perfect." I never even asked him how he was. Then he started talking a little bit more. "Listen, I think you're a great person. If you just work a little bit harder, you can easily pass the tests. Physics isn't that hard, you know." At that point, I was just thinking, what the hell, dude? I was in the 2nd grade. I don't really know what grade that is in America, sorry. I did have physics, but only in the first half year. I said to him, "I'm sorry, I've never had you as a teacher, and I don't have physics anymore. You must have me confused with someone else." He looked confused. "No, I'm sure. Or wait, do you have a twin sister?" I smirked, said no, and I walked away. but it made me feel really uncomfortable. About a month later, a girl walked over to me and said hi. Since by this time I was getting much politer, I said hi back. She asked me, "Did you get contacts? Your eyes are so light, so green." I didn't think it was weird because a lot of people asked me that so many times. Plus, my eye color did change a lot of times from darker to lighter. I just said, no, I guess it's the light. She replied, "You're a joker. They've always been brown, but now they just turned green." At that point, I was starting to get pissed off, so I just said goodbye. And she said, "Wait, where are you going?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I have English class right now, and I don't even know you." At that point, I just went to my class, but I remember the girl having a confused look on her face. 1 week later, during a break, my friends and I were talking and eating. A friend walked up to us with a pale face. We were worried, so asked him what was wrong. And he said, "Helena, I was upstairs when I thought I saw you. I mean, we were talking. We were all confused and didn't understand what he was saying." After a moment, he said, "Helena, there's a girl that looks just like you. And she told me that she would meet me in a bit. And she went to the ladies' room. But when I walked down the stairs and I saw you at the table, that's why I came over here." My friend was in shock, and a friend brought him home. I mean, he really seemed traumatized to have been talking to someone he thought was me, and then saw me in a completely different area of the building, just seconds later. I was a little freaked out by this. It was no longer a coincidence. And to make it worse, a friend told me that perhaps I had a doppelganger, which she also told me meant that the death of a loved one was near. In June, the year was over and I went to a different school, and I never heard anything else about the other girl. That is, until 2 years later. I was 15 now. I had a better reputation. I had high grades, no more problems, and worked hard after school. One day at work, it was time for my break, and I walked outside and felt something cold on the back of my neck. I just thought it was the wind. But then I saw a friend of my family who was also a cop. I greeted him, but he had a worried look on his face. He said hello to me, and I asked him what was wrong. "Helena, don't worry, I won't tell your parents because you're a good girl. I'll just never forget that night." I had no idea what he was talking about. He then told me that the night before, he saw me in the city and I was cursing him out. I was shocked. I went pale and I felt like I was going to throw up. He asked if I was okay. I started telling him this whole story I've told you as quickly as possible. He didn't believe me, but said to just forget the whole thing, and he wasn't going to talk to my parents about what I had apparently said to him. I mean, that was it. But to this day, I have no idea what that thing is or was out there. The thing that looked so much like me that fooled so many people. I mean, I am scared and curious, but at the same time, I think I just need to let things be. I'm more afraid that something worse will happen to me if I ever really find out what that thing is. Time Loop by OK Shirt. I'm a 23-year-old male, and around 8 years ago, I studied at a language school in Dublin, Ireland. We were there for 2 weeks, and one day we went on a trip to a nearby fishing town. Sadly, I don't remember the name. It was on a weekend and probably a local holiday because the streets were packed and some sort of festival was underway. We arrived with a group and had a brief tour around town and then got some free time. My friends and I decided to walk around the city center and check out a few shops. There were 4 of us: me, my best friend Miles, his sister Mary, and our mutual friend Anne. We decided to split into pairs so the guys could do guy stuff and the girls could do their own thing. Miles and I had a good time exploring. We grabbed something to eat and ran into some friends from the bus, bought some souvenirs, and before we knew it, it was time to head back. We had agreed to meet in front of a tea shop or cafe, I don't remember exactly, but it had a beautiful light blue facade that really stood out, so we chose it as our meeting point. As we were approaching the cafe, we realized we were on the opposite side of the street and needed to cross. At that moment, Anne called me and asked where we were. I told her we just had to cross the street and would be right there. She said she was already waiting and Mary was inside paying for something at the counter. I saw Anne and we waved at each other across the street and I hung up. The sidewalk was really narrow. There was a bus stop in front of us and a bunch of people were getting off, so the crowd was pretty dense. The nearest crosswalk was just past the bus stop, but Miles and I looked at each other and decided to make a detour through an alley on our right and try to go around the crowd. As we came out of that alley, we noticed that there were way fewer people on the street than before. I wouldn't say we felt uneasy or that the streets were suddenly empty. I mean, nothing dramatic like that. But it was noticeably quieter, just enough to feel a bit off. We figured the bus had picked up a bunch of people and left. We crossed the street and I immediately noticed that Anne wasn't in front of the cafe anymore. I pulled out my phone to call her, but I had no signal. And Miles checked his phone. Same thing. We didn't think too much about it and went inside the shop to look for them, but it was empty except for the cashier. We asked if Mary had just been there, and the cashier said that we were the first people to come inside in a while. So we walked up and down the street, but the girls were nowhere to be found. At first I thought maybe they had run off somewhere or were just messing with us. But that seemed less likely by the second, because we were supposed to meet 20 minutes before our bus left. Miles and I looked at each other and realized we had no idea what was going on. We had already wasted a good 10 minutes looking for them, so we needed to head to the bus ASAP. Half joking, I suggested that we backtrack and go through the alley again, and Miles immediately agreed, like he was thinking the same thing. We rushed back, crossed the street, and went through the alley again, and ended up right where Anne had called me the first time. I checked my phone, and this time there was signal. So I called Anne back and asked where she was. She answered right away and said nothing had changed since our last conversation. She was still standing in front of the shop and Mary was still inside paying. The crowd at the bus stop was back, and Miles and I squeezed through, crossed the street, and sure enough, Anne was standing right there like before. A moment later, Mary walked out of the shop. They greeted us casually and then noticed we looked a bit puzzled. Immediately, we both joked that we had just gone through a time loop. On the way back to Dublin, I checked the call times. The 2 calls to Anne were 2 minutes apart. I didn't even show Miles that because I knew he wouldn't be surprised at all. Neither of us knows what that was that we had gone through, and we really never talked about it again. Uncle Josh note here. Cool story. I had something very similar happen to me about lost time. I think I've shared it before in the past, but maybe I haven't. Remind me in the comments or shoot me an email, and I'll make a note of it to bring up that story about my period of time that I don't have any idea what happened and how my friend and I kind of lost that time. Pretty neat story. Crazed Woman by Educational Apple. For context, at the time I lived in Southwest Florida. I was sleeping over at my girlfriend's house, and she lived in a decent neighborhood surrounding a small golf course. The block she lived on had 18 houses circled by a road with houses on the other side of that road. The block she lived on and the identical 3 blocks behind, half of the houses didn't have fences. So, for example, you could look out the back sliding glass door of her house and see the backsliding door and even into the neighbor's house behind her. So you could essentially cut through the houses to skip having to walk around all of them, to which my girlfriend told me kids did that all the time on the way home from the school bus. Her bedroom was on the left side of the house if you were facing it, with a window in the center of the room. Her bed was directly next to this window, placed in the corner of her room. When we first started sharing the bed together, I noticed she had preferred to sleep on the outside of the bed as opposed to the inside. She and I have joked about the roles being reversed, but that's how she liked it, and to be honest, I find it comfier anyway. She had cats, and they had beat up a small sliver of the blinds in the bottom corner that I like to cover with a pillow at night. Her neighborhood was diverse, with large families of all ethnicities living about, and there was even a slight criminal activity element there too. Her neighbor had a son who got in a speed chase at 16 and brought it to that neighborhood when he crashed and was caught. That same neighbor had an 11-year-old son that offered to sell me weed as I walked from my car to my girlfriend's front door. So it wasn't a Sunnyside neighborhood, but it wasn't trench-like either. A solid 6 out of 10 on the scale if you get my scale. And I was essentially living there. I was there all the time and slept over so much. So here we go with the story. One night a couple of years ago, I, 19 male, was asleep in my bed with my girlfriend, 18 female. We'd been together 2 years. I must have woken up because I don't remember being awake. The time would have been around 2 to 4 a.m., as my girlfriend and I at that time in our lives went to bed a bit past midnight every night. I awoke to the sound of screaming from outside the house, deep in the neighborhood. To describe the scream as detailed as possible, it was a woman's scream, but it didn't sound like one of distress. It sounded like rage or insanity. It wasn't a high shriek. It was powerful, like a true horror movie creature scream. I heard the scream, and it sounded like 2 or 3 blocks behind my girlfriend's house, but still within hearing distance. With it sounding as described, I was locked in bed. I probably could have moved, but I was like paralyzed. I believe from fear, most of all, but I really was trying to read the scream. I locked up to absorb it all, trying to get any sense of distress. But there was none. It was just a wild wailing. The scream was continuous, with short breaks with no more than 3 seconds. It was mystically loud and wild. As I was listening to the scream, I heard it from the depths of the neighborhood approaching closer and getting louder as if it were coming towards my girlfriend's house. The thing is, I could tell whatever was making the scream was running through the neighborhood. It seemed so fast. It couldn't have been an old lady. At that point, it sounded like it was down the street by about a dozen houses, and it was also at that point when my girlfriend woke up. She immediately was worried and asked if I was awake. And as she was asking me that, I heard this being approaching our direction. I had no doubt in my mind because that scream was getting louder. In that moment, it felt like a nightmare, one where you try so hard to escape or hide from that thing chasing you. But as always, you're inevitably in its grasp and/or sight. I hope that makes sense. So, there she was asking me if I was awake, and I said yes. Unfortunately for her, my answer was short because I felt this thing approaching, as if straight for us. I also said one other thing along the lines of, wait, but in my mind I felt I couldn't express the importance of being quiet quick enough, waiting for this thing to hopefully run by our window, without completely freaking her the fuck out. So we were both awake and now quiet, and all in the same time it went from those dozen houses down or so to next door. It was then that the screaming stopped for one of its short breaks. It was still undoubtedly moving. As I was anticipating it to start again, or some crazy lady to start beating on the windows, I heard grass crunching from right outside my girlfriend's window. That's why I wanted my girlfriend to be quiet. Somehow I knew that was going to happen. Luckily, we were both quiet, as we waited to be able to detect this screaming woman again. It felt like maybe 5 or 10 seconds where it was maybe waiting outside the window or slowly creeping past it. Then it started up a couple of houses down, into the distance at that same pace. My girlfriend and I were so relieved, but then and still now were disturbed and confused. We were grateful we could talk again, and I can't remember if I went back to bed. As I recall, I'd have to say not because it was so jarring. I mean, the whole thing lasted about 3 or 5 minutes. I think about this from time to time, and it's always hard to understand or predict what exactly it was or why it was. I know I'll likely never know, but I find it more disturbing that that person or entity was confident and fearless enough to raise the alarm of, I'm sure, the entire neighborhood, and it seemingly had no motive but to disturb everyone. There was no damage to property, and it didn't try beating on our window like I thought it would. And I'm telling you, that scream was not one anyone would have come out of their house at that hour to investigate. So I wonder what it could have been. I don't believe in the paranormal, but what person or rather woman could do that? I've also watched a few different videos of animal screams native to my area, and even just in general, but nothing comes close. As I'm writing this out right now, it might not seem like the scariest thing or even as complex as I'm describing it. But when I do think about it on occasion, it's just so disturbing. The connection I felt to the entity behind the scream. I mean, I knew it was going to be next to me. There was literally a single window between us within a minute of me theorizing that. I've seen videos of different animals and even people insanely screaming through my searches, and even looking for others who've encountered something close. But nothing sounds even close to the power of the scream that I heard. It was truly wicked. I wish I was an annoying neighbor or boyfriend to the neighbor and had asked anyone in the route if they had any outdoor cameras, so maybe that could have given us peace of mind. But I've of course already pitched the theory to myself that it was just some prankster or junkie. But the motive behind that scream wasn't brainless or senseless or playful. I don't know how many other ways to describe it. That's all I got. Anyone out there got any theories of what this could have been, or have a similar event? It definitely felt mystic, like I said. And not in a good way, but a terrifying devil-type mystic. He Got on Our Exact Train Car Again, by Jazzy Josie. I took the train into the city for a concert with my friend on a Friday night. Both of us are in our mid-20s, and we were a little high on edibles. We'd both taken the train many times before, and while I've had some weird experiences, as any young woman might, he'd never seen anything like this. I was honestly stumped and way spooked, too. About 3 stops into our 5-stop journey, I noticed through the window of the train car a guy, probably late 20s, maybe early 30s, tall and fit, was doing pull-ups on the bar of the other car's ceiling. You know, like the bar you hold onto so you don't fall over into someone when the train rolls to a stop. I thought he might have been younger at first, and with his friends, just messing around or something. The stranger then started doing dips and other workouts on the seats, looking straight ahead. The guy was flexing and staring at himself in the train window, and at us through the glass. My friend and I at first started laughing uncontrollably about it. I mean, edible high, remember? We thought he was just getting a pump in and being a little weird. We were 2 stops away from our destination, and we watched him get off the train car next to us. And then things got weirder. He didn't leave the station, but instead quickly ducked into our train car. Trying not to laugh now that the stranger was literally feet from us, we looked over to see him staring straight at us. I mean, straight at us. I had my back to the guy, but my friend said he took his coat off to reveal a tight black t-shirt. He was flexing his muscles and began doing pull-ups at the bar right next to us. He was grunting and making noises, and it all seemed so creepy to us. But no one else in the car seemed to even notice him. The train stalled at the station with the doors open for longer than it routinely would have, as it sometimes does if there's a delay. I turned around, and the stranger stared into me. My friend and I looked back at each other, and I had an unignorable instinct to get off that train. Without a word, we both darted out the door and onto the platform. The doors almost immediately closed, and the train swished away, leaving us alone in the station, reeling from the weird interaction. My friend was quite concerned that that guy may have been her threat, and I admittedly was glad I hadn't been alone. We waited a few more minutes for another train to come and made it to our destination and had a great time at the show. When we returned to the metro station hours later, edibles wearing off, we were about to go through the turnstiles when we saw him. The stranger was speaking with a woman casually in the area just before the turnstiles. We freaked out and moved quickly through them, down the escalators, and ran to catch the train that was arriving as we got to the platform. We boarded the train and had a, "Was that really him?" and "Is he following us?" debate for 2 stops or so. From what we saw, he remained outside the station and hadn't gotten on the train with us or even gone down the escalator. We also hadn't seen him earlier at the station when we got off to go to the concert or inside the venue. We thought we had left him in the dust when the train zoomed away the first time. When it came time to get off at our stop and go home, my friend got up and walked towards the doors, standing parallel to them while I stood by his left side, facing the back of the train car. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, the stranger came into my view and started making strides towards me. He was staring at me, right in the eye, and he picked up his pace. I got spooked so bad that I ducked between my friend and the train door just before it opened to try to get out of the stranger's path. I stumbled out of the train car as it opened and we ran to the escalator. I was afraid to look back and see if he had followed us. But then, from above, we watched the stranger exit the car we had just been in together and move to the next car over. We were so paranoid walking home from the station, and both of us could not reason how it was possible that he got on the same train and the same car with us both times, or why he had taken an interest in staring at only us. The route we took was not a particularly common one at all, and it was late at night. We were stumped. So did the stranger with the scary stare getting his workout in on the metro that night? Let's not friggin' meet. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this episode on YouTube and you like what you hear, please give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment. I'd like to know what you thought of the stories. If you're so inclined, maybe subscribe or tell your friends about the channel or podcast. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support of what I'm doing a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, or consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Lots of cool stuff there, some pretty neat designs, and I'm telling you, you will be the cat's ass wearing that gear. A link to my storefront on tpublic.com is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.